Greetings, friends. David Marks here. Before we get started on noise reduction, I must admit that this is a tough topic for two reasons. First, when we talk about noise, we really have to zoom in and fixate on the tiniest details in our digital images. This level of pixel peeping can be hard to see in a video. The second problem is that noise reduction is never perfect. What we're looking for here is the point between an original capture that's too noisy and a finished product that looks too blurry. Now that you know what to expect, let's jump in and let's get started. On the screen right now is an image that I downloaded from the incredible camera testing website dpreview.com. I picked this image to get us started because I think that it's easier to learn what Lightroom's noise reduction sliders do when you're working on a test image like this one, where we have a wide variety of colors and textures. Let me show you what Lightroom's tools can do here, and then we'll put these controls to use on some real-world examples. For a bit of background, there are three common causes for noise in modern digital photography. Our images get noisy when our original capture is badly underexposed, when the shutter stays open for a really long time, or when we crank the ISO setting way up in our cameras. The term noise here refers to the idea of signal-to-noise ratio, where the noise is the quantity of false information, false pixels, in our image. The grainy speckled texture, the stuff that looks like sand all over the top of this image, that's what we call luminance noise. And the false colored spots, these red and green dots, are called colored noise. Of the two problems, removing the colored noise is the easier one in Lightroom Classic. To make the colored noise disappear, I'm going to open up the Details panel. Now, I'm going to pull this color noise reduction slider up. I'm going to say this again and again throughout this tutorial, but when we are fighting noise, we want to move the sliders in this panel as little as possible. In this case, it only takes about 20 units or so of color noise reduction to make most of those false colored spots disappear. If I continue to crank this slider up, then I will begin to suppress some of the real colors in this image. Watch this area of the paint brushes as I move this one further up. Since I don't want to lose any color in those areas, I'm going to set this slider back down to the minimum amount that we needed to hide most of the colored noise. On most images, a small adjustment to this slider is all that you're usually going to need. On certain images, though, messing with the other two sliders in this section of the panel can be helpful. Let me move over to another section of this test image to show you what the detail slider can do for us here. When I added the color noise reduction a second ago, I also slightly decreased the micro contrast in this image. If that made a noticeable difference, then moving this detail slider around might bring a tiny bit of edge contrast back. Watch the top of the Jack of Hearts here, or the words red-orange on the color wheel when I move this slider up and down. I see a tiny improvement, but again, I want to use as little of this as possible, so I'm going to back this one off until the effect is barely visible. Finally, there is this smoothness slider. This one removes large areas of color molting, or splotchiness. To show you what this one does, let me move over here and zoom out a little. If I drag the smoothness slider all the way down, can you see how big blobs of colored noise come back? My eyes notice this the most in the gray backdrop, but I can also see a little of it here too in the feathers and this green plastic thing. Visually, this one is very similar to the color slider, the one that I moved first, but they target different size artifacts. The color slider does a better job wiping out the false red and green dots, and the smoothness works better when you have large blotchy colored areas to remove. Let me press the letter Y on my keyboard right now to split the screen. And let's move back to that area where we first started. On the left is the original image with all its flaws, and on the right is what we have now that we've carefully removed the colored noise. The one on the right looks much better to me, and if I move this area up to the center of the screen, then I think you can see a noticeable improvement. Well, now that you've seen what this type of noise reduction does, let's talk about how to remove the luminance noise. Much like with the color noise reduction slider, our goal here is to move the luminance slider up until some of the graininess disappears and no further. When I move this one, I'm looking for the lowest setting where the speckled noise is no longer prominent and overbearing. The danger, if you crank this slider all the way up, is that you will wipe out some of the meaningful details in your image. Watch the words DP Review right in the center if I bring this slider all the way to the top. See how at its maximum setting, this gives our image a plasticky feel? We don't want this, and we don't want this. What we want is something like this. Now, I can fiddle with these other two sliders to bring a little micro contrast back and to preserve some of the smallest details. Let me zoom out once more, and then I'll split my screen. As I move around this image, I hope that you can see what a huge improvement we've made here. The image on the right is not noiseless, but it's a whole lot better than our original. And that's really all that we can hope for when we're working from such a difficult starting point. Now that you've seen what these sliders can do for us, let's move on to a real image. Here we have an image that I captured early one morning in Glacier National Park. Before I started recording this tutorial, I did everything that I could to fine-tune my overall image, but I have not done anything to remove the noise yet. I said that I've not done anything to remove the noise yet, but that's not quite true, because the default for color noise reduction in Lightroom for most digital camera RAW files is not 0. From the factory, the Adobe engineers decided that a low color noise reduction amount, this 25 setting right here, would benefit the vast majority of images. I think that was a good call on Adobe's part, because if I move this slider down to 0 and zoom in, then look at all the colored noise that my camera actually captured here. In this case, that factory default setting looked fine, so let me restore that one. Now, let's see what we can do about this photo's noticeable luminance noise problem. Remember on the last image how phony things looked when I dragged this slider all the way up to 100? The same problem here. Cranking this one all the way up obliterates the small details in this image, and it makes it look cartoonish. So now, let me teach you a little trick. This time, I'm going to hold down the Alt key. That's the Alt Option key on a Mac, or the Alt key on a PC, with one finger, while I slowly drag the luminance noise reduction slider up. When the Alt key is depressed, your image will turn into a black and white while you're moving this slider around. Temporarily hiding all the colors is super helpful when we're hunting for that happy medium point between noisy and blurry. I don't think that we'll see a significant difference on this image, but it's worth knowing that the Alt trick also works with the detail and contrast sliders in this portion of the panel too. My eyes only see a tiny difference when I move the detail slider around, and I can't see any difference at all with the contrast slider here, so I'm going to set this one back to 0. On some images, these two sliders will make a tiny difference, but their effects are not going to be noticeable all the time. Let me zoom out and split the screen so that you can see a side-by-side before and after. On the left is my original image with no noise reduction whatsoever applied to it, and on the right is where we are now. Down here in the lake, and throughout most of the image, I'm really pleased. Up here in the mountain peaks, we're losing a little bit of fine detail, but it's tolerable. If it really mattered, if I were serious about polishing up this image, then I might create a mask at this point and try to paint a little texture back into the towering rock walls. Anyway, without spending too much time painting all over this image, I think that what we have now is the best that I can do for an image shot at such a high ISO setting on this camera. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you learned something today, then please hit the subscribe button and leave us a like or a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in our next tutorial.